Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this Dyscalculia and Access to Work presentation with the brilliant Katrina Cochrane from the Director of Positive Dyslexia. Thank you for joining us tonight, Katrina. It's great to have you.
Pleasure.
Pleasure. We are going to get straight started. And we hope you enjoy the presentation. I'm sure Katrina's open to questions.
Yes.
Either pop them in the chat or I'll ask them at the end, save them for the end. And let's make a start. Over to you, Katrina. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, thanks, everyone. I'm really sorry for the delay. Apologies for my voice. I'm just getting over COVID, so I'm a little bit croaky, but it should hold up for the next session. As Kat said, I'm Director of Positive Dyslexia. I used to work for the BDA as Head of Education. I'm a Specialist Dyslexia Assessor. I'm not really an expert in dyscalculia at all, so it's been a bit of a learning curve for me, doing some research about dyscalculia and access to work. But I'm really passionate about bringing an awareness about access to work to the general public, because so many people I come across don't know about it, and I think it's really important. I'm also trustee of the Adult Dyslexia Centre, and I'll give you a bit more information about their work later on in the slides. So, what is access to work? Next slide, please, Kat. Some of you will have had disabled students allowance possibly at university, and I call access to work disabled students allowance for people in employment, really. There is a lot of overlap. A lot of students then go on to access to work and get the same set of recommendations for them as students as they do for being in work. It is an amazing system. It's a program run by the DWP, and it allows people with a disability, and dyscalculia is seen as a disability, to obtain reasonable adjustments so they're not disadvantaged when doing their job. You can apply if you're employed or self-employed, and there are various other criteria to meet, but a lot of people don't realise, for example, if you're self-employed, you can still get it. And I think it's a really important thing to advertise as much as possible. Next slide, please, Kat. Oh, I feel like the chap and the COVID, the Professor Whitty. So there are a lot of myths about dyscalculia, and I'm sure all of you who are listening tonight know about all of these myths, and you've discussed them beforehand. A lot of people think that dyscalculia, well, possibly doesn't exist, a bit like dyslexia. Possibly it's misdiagnosed. There's still a lot of confusion between dyscalculia and difficulties with maths and dyslexia, for example. A lot of people think it's related to intelligence. A lot of people cut themselves off, don't they, because they just think, oh, I'm not very good at maths. And you know, the perception about maths difficulties is quite different to literacy difficulties, isn't it? You can laugh off maths difficulties, but it's more difficult to laugh off not being able to read, for example. So a lot of you here will know that around 3 or 6 to 6% of the population have got dyscalculia. So these are large numbers, aren't they? And these are people who have that difficulty in school. They don't suddenly grow out of it as adults, do they? Many adults say to me, I used to be dyslexic, or presumably they say, I used to be dyscalculic. It's not something you grow out of. It's something you have better strategies with, but it's something you always have. Next slide, please, Kat. There is a definition of dyscalculia, and there will be a new one. And hopefully around about Christmas, we will know the new definition of dyscalculia. And there are some differences that will be in the new definition, mainly around subitizing, where you're looking at a number of dots and not being able to see them as a whole number, but having to add up each individual dot. but it will be very interesting to get that new definition in. At the moment, we're still going by this current definition, this BDA definition, but it is that persistent difficulty in understanding numbers, which can have a huge effect in work for people. And it'd be very interesting to hear some of your own stories. I recognise quite a few names on the who are listening tonight, but for many others, do put on your own difficulties in the workplace in the chat box. I'd be really interested to hear some of your stories. Okay, next slide, please. This comes from the Call Scotland, and they talk about dyscalculia as being a sort of range of these different difficulties. I think this is a really nice, nice description of all those different difficulties around estimating, ordering, sequencing, direction. We know that if you have working memory difficulties, that's going to find things like times tables really difficult to learn, and many dyslexic, dyscalculic adults never learn their times tables. Mental maths is always a difficulty, but it could be around recalling maths facts, processes, symbols, anything like that. And of course, under stress, any of your strategies that you've got just fall apart, don't they? Obviously in the workplace, you're under a lot more stress. So if you haven't come across that nice infographic, then do go to Call Scotland. They've got some wonderful things on there. Okay, Kat, next slide, please. In work, you might have difficulty transferring information on spreadsheets. It may be the difficulties with mental maths that we talked about. It may be just remembering verbal information. If you're being given lots of instructions at once, it may be difficult to remember all of them, particularly if there are 3 in one sentence. It may be that you have difficulty with budgets. It may be that you transpose numbers, 6s and 9s, 1s and 7s, those sorts of things. And it's that difficulty that's causing you problems with numbers in particular. So lots and lots of different things that could be affecting you in work. Next slide, please, Kat. And I'm sure that you know all of these different difficulties as well. So any email with a number in it might be problematic. So meeting room 456, telling the time, anything with concept of time we know is of difficulty. We obviously now we can use things like smartwatches, mobile phones to help us, but a lot of adults I come across have never learnt to tell the time on a conventional watch. Anxiety, that has an impact on all of these different things. Remembering passwords, PIN numbers, any of those things. Anything that's presented in a graphic form or a chart form. Estimation, particularly if you've been given a task to do in work. I mean, I know in the classroom when I've given children time to do coursework and I've told them that they've got a month to do their coursework, I know that means nothing to them now. And the same thing in the workplace, estimating how much time or how long it will take you to do a task is really, really difficult. It could have an impact on being punctual. Knowing what time to turn up for things like Zoom calls, particularly if they're in a continental, if you're given the time in a continental fashion as well, they don't understand about how to use a continental clock. Getting lost, or anything with a date or a number related fact is very, very difficult. Next slide, Kat, please. Obviously, we know all of the research behind some of the difficulties and the non-maths difficulties associated with dyscalculia. particularly with low self-esteem, anxiety, depression, all of the co-occurring difficulties that people with dyscalculia may have as well to contend with. Things like executive functioning skills, organisational skills, they can be affected hugely. So those are the few of the research that's been done into all these different areas. And these aren't necessarily maths related, but can go alongside dyscalculia. Next slide, please. Any of you who know Amanda Kirby will know the amazing work that she does. And if you're not linked in with her, then I strongly urge you to link in with her on LinkedIn. She puts the most amazing things out there. And this was a something she put on there recently with all of the co-occurring difficulties. And if you can look then on the top right-hand side, you've got dyscalculia, all the difficulties with timetables, time concepts, organisation, orientation, and how it does co-occur with all the other difficulties. She talks about these strengths that are common to all of the neurodiverse traits there. And there are a huge number of strengths that dyscalculic people have. They're normally very curious, they're very creative, they can link ideas, empathetic, they're analytical, lots and lots of strengths there, but a huge amount of challenges there, particularly when dyscalculia touches on other areas as well. And these neurodiverse traits are increasing all the time, aren't they? I haven't got the code with me for some of the ones at the bottom there, but if anyone's interested, I'll certainly pass them on. But you've got visual impairment being added to that, OCD, anxiety, depression. You've also got the effects of long COVID as well being added in there as well. So I just think that's a very good diagram that shows all the co-occurring difficulties there. Next slide, please, Kat. So why might you need access to work? I think a lot of people don't disclose before they go into a job that they have got a neurodiversity. I think that's very sad, but I can also understand as well why people don't do that. People still think that it will put them at a disadvantage. It will mean that they might not get an interview. It will mean that they might not get offered the job. Many people think that they will say something once they get into a job. And I think probably a lot of people think, well, I'll start, and then they don't say anything. I do a lot of workplace needs assessments, and often it's when that person has been put on a performance plan and I get called in to do the needs assessment for them. And it's often the line manager will say, you know, why didn't you say something earlier? But I really can understand why somebody will not say anything beforehand. But access to work is a huge support, a huge way of accessing additional resources that will help somebody in work. Next slide, please, Kat. In terms of questions around access to work, I'm sure you'll have some more. The main one that I get asked is, do I need proof that I'm dyscalculic? And no, you don't. You only need to self-diagnose. All you need to do is say that you have dyscalculia, and the process will start. And that goes for any other co-occurring difficulty as well. So dyslexia, ADHD, any of those things, once you say that you have that difficulty, then the process will start. I would say if you're going to do any kind of further professional exams, or you're going to be going to university or returning to university, you will need a formal diagnosis. And we've got some assessors here tonight, and hopefully I'm saying the right thing here, but a diagnostic assessment is needed for dyslexia first and then dyscalculia. So it's quite a lengthy process, but to get access to work, it's not needed. But if you have any questions about that, do put that down in the chat box. Next slide, please, Kat. If you are wondering whether or not you have got dyscalculia, there are various checklists out there. And again, Kat and the others will tell me if there's anything else that they can suggest. But the Steve Chin checklist is the one that's most easily accessible. Ask you lots of questions, and it's pretty detailed. So it's asking you about, do you have difficulty remembering basic addition, subtraction facts? Do you find it difficult to progress from using materials such as your fingers, blocks, tallies, to using only digits and numbers? Do you find it difficult to write numbers which have zeros in them? That kind of thing. So it's quite a detailed checklist, but it's free. And it might give you an idea whether or not there is dyscalculia there, and whether or not you want to have anything further undertaken. Next slide, please. There's also the Do It Profiler, which does incorporate dyscalculia in it. This is quite a good commercial screener. It's only about £30. It looks at a whole range of different difficulties like mental health, dyslexia, dyspraxia, all sorts of things. It's quite quick. It takes about half an hour. And it has Amanda Kirby is behind it. So it's very well respected. Gives you a little report as well. As I say, you don't need it for Access to Work, but some people like to have a better understanding of their strengths and challenges. Next slide, please, Kat. Obviously, if you do have a disability like dyscalculia, you are protected under the Equality Act. That could mean changing the recruitment process so that a candidate will get an automatic interview. It could mean somebody has their own desk instead of hot desking. I find that causes a lot of anxiety for people, particularly post-COVID, where they're going into work and they don't know where they're going to be sitting, or they feel they're sitting at somebody else's desk, and hot desking can cause a lot of anxiety. It could be changing equipment. It could be, for example, having two screens, which for tonight certainly caused me a lot of anxiety because this didn't work on either screen. But certainly two screens, if you're using a spreadsheet and you're transferring information, then having two screens is incredibly helpful. And Access to Work would pay for that as well. It might be additional training opportunities. It could be flexible work, part-time work, that kind of thing as well. So you are protected under the Equality Act with a disability. Next slide, please, Kat. So how would you go about applying for Access to Work? Firstly, go to gov.uk, Access to Work, and register. And as I say, self-diagnose. The Access to Work advisor, it says, will contact you within 7 days. There is there's quite a lot of backlog at the moment, so I hope these timings are correct. You will need your national insurance number, and if you're self-employed, you'll need your UTR, your unique reference number. You'll need your workplace address and a contact name for your line manager or HR person. And the whole process can be set up either at your place of work or remotely by phone or Zoom. As I say, I do these regularly and they do work very well by Zoom, Teams. As long as I can see where that person is working, it works very well that it's done remotely, actually. I think it's less, it becomes a less anxious process as well for the person, because you don't necessarily want that person to be coming in to your place of work and everyone's saying, well, who's that person? What are they doing? Particularly if you haven't disclosed that you have a disability to everyone. Next slide, please, Kat. Obviously, you do need to have a contract of employment or if you are self-employed, then you have that evidence of being self-employed. It does actually work earlier than having a job. If you've got a job offer letter or a job start date, or even a letter confirming an interview, you can start the process earlier. And actually with the backlog, I would suggest people do it as early as possible. It can also provide someone to help at the interview. And this is really important. A lot of people don't realise that that's perfectly acceptable. Large organisations like John Lewis have recently started advertising that they will give their job questions, the interview questions, in advance to candidates. Now, actually, that's perfectly reasonable to ask for any candidate. But if you have got anxiety in an interview, if you have got working memory difficulties, then having those job interview questions in advance are really, really helpful. You can actually take notes into an interview as well, and a lot of people don't realise that either. So you can refer to notes. Although I remember interviewing somebody, and I did ask them if they could tell me their things, their good points and bad points, and the person said, "Oh, I pulled out a list of bad points from their handbag and proceeded to tell me all of them." So that wasn't actually very helpful for them. But yes, taking notes, taking things to refer to, taking someone with you if you need to, and ask for those job questions in advance. Next slide, please. Is there a cost to this? Well, no, it's completely free of charge to the employee. Depending on the size of the company, there may be some costs for the company, but not for the employee at all. If that employee changes job, then you will need another needs assessment carried out, and you would need to start the process again. But there are no costs to the actual employee themselves. The only caution I would say is that sometimes the needs assessors can be carrying out needs assessments on a whole range of different people. They may not have the skills to know exactly what a neurodiverse person needs, and they may be very generic in their reporting. So it's something to be aware of. I have had some people who've had the Access to Work assessment done, which is free, and then they've come to me for a more in-depth specialist Access to Work assessment afterwards. Or some large companies, because there is a cost involved and they would have to pay for everything anyway, they will get a private report done, needs assessment report done, and again, that's much more in depth and suited to the employee and knowing all about their particular difficulties. Next slide, please, Kat. A lot of people ask me what is actually going to happen in a needs assessment. Obviously, before the needs assessment happens, we get together as much information as we can. We send out a questionnaire to the employer, we send out a questionnaire to the employee, we get lots of information. We want to find out exactly what's happening. We'll get a copy of the job description. Sometimes things have moved away from the original job description, and the job that someone's actually doing doesn't really bear much relation to the original job description. So we want to find out exactly what's happening. We want to involve the employer as much as possible, and we want to spend time with the employer and the employee also. On the day, we want to make sure we've got all of that paperwork, we've got all of the information. And in fact, if I haven't got the information, then I won't go ahead with the needs assessment. Sometimes there are reasons why employers are wanting to start the process, and it's not always positive, actually. So sometimes they're just ticking a box, but it's actually on occasion, I've gone into, well, quite a few occasions I go in, and the first thing that the employer, the line manager, will say to you is, can they do the job? And you have to be very, very firm and say, no, that's not for me to tell you that. So you want to find out exactly what's going on. Is there a is that person on a performance plan? What's happened to trigger this? All of those things. And then we'll look at the current work performance, and we'll look at things like what's worked before, what's worked well beforehand. Sometimes I'll go in to do a needs assessment, and there's been a change of line manager, and that person's worked really well with a particular line manager, but that line manager's left. You've had a new line manager in, and things are just not working so well anymore. We'll look at what particular adjustments might work well as well. We might demo some equipment. We might look at some apps that might help, some training that might help, all those different things. And then we'll go away and look at the report, talk it through with everyone so that there's no surprises in the report, and then send the report back to the person so that they can start buying in all the equipment that's suggested and address the recommendations. One of the things that I normally do is suggest a follow-up meeting in 6 months' time and see whether or not the recommendations are working. Next slide, please. So the kinds of recommendations the needs assessment gives are both human and non-human support. So the human support could be, might suggest extended mentoring or a coach, particularly if there's ADHD alongside the dyscalculia, they might need a coach to help them through some aspects of work. There might be recommendations for training for the whole company, for example, and I think it's really important that awareness training is given to companies around dyscalculia, which is still fairly unknown really in companies, isn't it? It may be that we give recommendations for things like if somebody has a difficulty with noise, that we would recommend that they can have access to a quiet room, that they have their own dedicated desk. Some people have difficulties with sensory processing if they're neurodiverse. So we might look at lighting, we might look at where they are in an open plan office, for example, as well, anything like that. So lots and lots of human support as well as the non-human support. Next slide, please, Kat. There are obviously lots and lots of things that can help in the workplace. And obviously, I'm very happy to give a copy of these slides out to anybody who would like a copy of these slides. These are just some technology that I've come across beforehand. You may well have come across all of these things beforehand. So there are things like Photomath, My Script Calculator, I presume it's Equatio, isn't it? That's an online tool that helps with equations, formulas, quizzes. You've got software that reads numbers out aloud as well. And I know that there are additional, many more things coming out on the market all the time, aren't there? Kat, next slide, please. For those of you who've got children who you might be concerned about possible maths difficulties with children, if you haven't come across this wheel of apps, this is fantastic. This is Call Scotland. These are generally free apps that you can get that help with maths difficulties. And there may be some there that adults can use as well. Perhaps you can tell me whether or not any of you use any of these apps already as adults, or if any of you are using them with your children. They've also got the wheel of apps for literacy as well. So do have a look at that on Call Scotland. Next slide, please, Kat. If you haven't come across Claro software as well, lots and lots of assistive technology that helps with numeracy skills, and the access to work recommendations may include Claro software, may include text help, But most important, the training on these things. Lots of students, for example, get this software and then they don't bother with the training, and so the software gets put in a cupboard or never gets used. And it's really, really good software. So make sure you get the training on that software, and the training will be part of the package that you get completely free from Access to Work. Next slide, please, Kat. And I know that the Dyscalculia Network have championed the Dyscalculator beforehand, so I'm sure that all of you know about that. But this is a really good resource as well that will help. So I'm sure Kat will give lots more information about the Dyscalculator as well. So having tools like that will really, really help in the workplace. Next slide, please. So just some other ideas that don't cost anything. Lots of companies think that Access to Work will suggest things that'll cost them lots of money, but a quiet room to work in, free, noise reducing headphones, very small charge really. Home working options. It may be that people would prefer to work at home. It's quieter at home. They might get more work done. Additional time for tasks, that's very important. Reminders for tasks. It might be that they need some additional support for remembering when a report needs to be handed in, that kind of thing. Extended mentoring from the line manager. Anything like that. Don't the very, very small cost of these things. It's not going to be expensive for the company to put some of these things in place. Next slide, please, Kat. But, I can't emphasize enough that there are so many benefits to having dyscalculia in the workplace. The strategic thinking that these neurodiverse individuals bring to the workplace, intuition, problem solving, heightened ability to read non-verbal cues. They're often very good with their manual skills, language skills, observation. And I think a lot of companies think about the negatives rather than thinking that the positives that these individuals bring to the workplace. So do bear in mind all of these positives. Next slide, please, Cam. Obviously, it's not just in work, is it? People may have difficulty at home, and there may be difficulties with budgeting, PIN numbers, bank statements. But I found that banks are much more geared to supporting neurodiverse people now. And so Barclays can offer things like, well, a lot of the banks do now. I've done work with Santander, for example. You don't have to have a PIN number. You can sign for things instead of trying to remember a PIN number. You can have text-to-speech software to read your bank statement aloud to you. So if you're not sure about any of these things, then obviously the Dyscalculia Network can help you with signposting you to any of these different areas. Next slide, please. Simple things like changing the background color of your computer can help as well. So AbilityNet can help you with doing that. That's free. Some people prefer the dark mode on their computers. Some people prefer different background colors or different fonts and sizes. So all of these things can help both in work and at home. Hopefully companies are starting to have a neurodiversity champion. It would be nice if they could have a Dyscalculia champion as well. And I'm sure Kat and Rob will be doing work about that for companies. Somebody can go to if they suspect they've got a neurodiverse condition, that they're not going always to HR about things. Training for managers, really important. And support groups, very, very important. being able to talk to people, being able to be part of a support group, very, very important. I have found that having a diagnosis of a neurodiversity later as an adult can have quite an impact on somebody. And there's all, the emotional side of dealing with that diagnosis can be quite hard for people. So they almost go through a period of mourning where they think about what could have been, what might have been. I might have done that with my life if I'd known this sooner. So having support groups really important for people to talk to others in the same position. Next slide, please, Kat. If you do think that you may have a co-occurring condition that is medical, do make sure you speak to the GP. I know you can go straight to Access to Work, but if there are potential concentration issues, for example, with dyscalculia, then do go to make sure you do speak to a GP. And if you haven't come across Right to Choose, that may be a quicker pathway for you. All of these things are becoming much longer to get a diagnosis. Access to Work used to be 16 weeks. I think that's even longer now. So be patient, but you will get there in the end. Next slide, please. So if you are interested in a diagnostic assessment, then make sure the person has got the appropriate qualifications, and you're looking for someone with AMDAD, which is the associate member of the British Dyslexia Association, Dyscalculia, and preferably an APC. But again, the Dyscalculia network will be able to find you someone very easily. Positive Dyslexia can, or the Adult Dyslexia Centre that I spoke about earlier and that I'm a trustee of. You'll be given that initial dyslexia assessment first, mainly to rule out maths difficulties in dyslexia, but it may be co-occurring difficulties that can be pointed out as well. If you have had a dyslexia assessment in the past, if it's fairly recent, you can have a top-up assessment of that previous assessment also. Next slide, please. And if this has sparked an interest and you'd like to train to be a workplace needs assessor, then I do run a course at level 4, and there's somebody on this who's listening tonight who's done the course, and it's just a 4-day course that trains you to be a needs assessor. So do speak to me if that's something that you'd be interested in doing. What next? Okay, so I'm very, very excited that Kat, Rob and I are going to be doing a joint level 3 dyslexia and dyscalculia course, and we've got various dates in November and December for that. Level 3 is around A-level standard, and it's about supporting learners with dyslexia and dyscalculia, but if that's of interest, do let us know. If you're a parent with a child with possible dyscalculia, then the ADC, the Adult Dyslexia Centre, has got a parents course coming up, and they cover dyscalculia in one of the weeks. The course is £80 for 4 sessions, and it also covers reading, spelling, as well as dyscalculia. So do go on the adc.org.uk website. They also have a free support group that meets regularly, and that's for adults. And so they have many adults who've had difficulties in the past, meet regularly. They've got one that meets online and one that meets in person in the local pub in Maidenhead. And great to meet other people who've gone through the same difficulties, both in work, school, and share those stories as well. And they have a free helpline. There's a free helpline number up there as well. So if anyone's watching or knows anyone who wants further advice, and do contact that free helpline, and that's for adults and for children. Okay, next. Okay, so many apologies for my voice. It's just about held out, and many apologies for, and thank you to Kat for moving the slides on. But if anyone's got any questions, I'm very, very happy to answer any questions. I'm just going to take a quick swig of water.
Thank you so much, Katrina. It's so wonderful to hear what the access to work process is and how that might help people. So let's have a look at some questions. So Craig says, will access to work still pay for the recommendations made by a private access to work assessment, e.g. screen software and mentoring? Would the private assessor have to provide certain amounts of quotes from each supplier?
Yes. Yes, we normally provide 3 quotes, but again, it depends on the size of the company. Really, you know, whether or not how much the employer has to pay towards the cost of the equipment.
Brilliant, thank
but
you.
Yes, they will accept it.
And Kerry says, can Dragon Speak be funded through Access to Work?
All of these things can be, as long as the needs assessor feels that that's what you need, then it will fund anything. It could fund a particular chair. It could fund, I don't know if any of you have come across the remarkable notebooks. They're fantastic. So my son has just got one, and they're £800. That's all been paid for. There are some wonderful things out there. As I say, it's really important to get the training on those things, so that you use them effectively and get the best out of that software.
And Lorraine says, what would you say the difference between maths difficulties in dyslexia and dyscalculia are?
Oh, well, Kat, I think that's more for you.
So I was going to say, Lorraine, we've actually got a really interesting part of our website on co-occurrence, and on that section it tells you about how dyslexia impacts maths learning a little bit. I'm just going to find you the section and pop it in the chat for you. So I'll just pop it in the chat here so you can find out more about how co-occurrence works and how dyslexia can impact maths. So it's slightly different because it's not necessarily about magnitude comparison and subitizing and ordering comparing numbers. It's often to do with phonological difficulties, working memory difficulties, processing difficulties, slightly slower processing, directional difficulties and things like that. So sometimes it can be quite hard to tell the two apart, and that's why it's good to be able to have that assessment with somebody who can unpick that a little bit more. But have a look on our website there.
And we are going to be covering that in the level 3 course, aren't we, Kat? So you can dip in and out of that if you're interested.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to say as well as that course, we've got lots of people here I know from different backgrounds, some people in the workplace, and some people who are adults themselves with dyscalculia. So we've got several events coming up. We always have a monthly free Q&A session. So if you've got any questions specifically around dyscalculia, Rob and I run those. There's one this Friday at 12 noon. You'd be welcome to join. We've also got maths anxiety day coming up, and we've got 3 events, including a dealing with maths anxiety webinar with Amanda, who's in this webinar here. She'll give you a wave, and that's being followed by a pub night for adults with dyscalculia, and that's just a donation or free if that's a difficulty for you. And there's also a maths anxiety webinar for parents and for educators too. So there's plenty of events going on to help you with more information. Lorraine, is there any training to be a workplace dyscalculia champion? At the moment, I actually don't know if there is anything, not as far as I know. Does anyone else know anything that I don't know? I don't think there is a dyscalculia champion concept at the moment in the UK I've heard of. But it's certainly something that now I've put in my mind now, and I'm thinking I should think about that. The only thing there is there's a numeracy champion through National Numeracy. So National Numeracy have numeracy champions. In fact, we have a numeracy champion here. Peter is a numeracy champion for him. So if you pop over to National Numeracy and their numeracy champion program is there, but it's not specifically around dyscalculia.
I was going to say, Kat, just to add to that. So yeah, there is in that course, there is a little bit on dyscalculia. But yeah, it's very much just a part of. So I definitely think that there are grounds for having that kind of workplace dyscalculia champion thing. So
a lot of companies have a neurodiversity champion now. So it's just sort of moving on from that they can start sort of maybe having a dyscalculia champion. I think it's just really important for someone to perhaps come forward and say, I have dyscalculia, come to me if you have any difficulties, as the first line of information and signposting maybe.
Yeah, although I would say that the problem with that is dyscalculia, speaking from experience, is so it's just not well known in the same way that dyslexia is. No. And so frequently, and I know this experience of someone else that was on the call, is that when you do declare it, you just have to get ready for, so what's that? And then there's a lot of explanations that you have to do. And then and one thing I feel quite strongly is, I mean, you mentioned this earlier with dyslexia, and I agree, it is easier to kind of mask dyscalculia, but at the same time, it suddenly worries a lot of people when you mention it, because all of a sudden they think money, and it can add to a lot of anxiety within the workplace. So I think there is still quite a lot of ground there to go before that signposting can take place. So I would just be careful on, the workplace and what it's like before you go there. I would just say, for me, but yeah.
What in terms of somebody going to a workplace to carry out a workplace needs assessment?
No, in the first place, for someone with dyscalculia to signpost, because there's just simply not that awareness there, unfortunately.
No. And what's been your Peter? Do you know? Have you seen any particular workplace needs assessments on a dyscalculic person? Are they a bit generic? Never seen one. No.
And I've been involved with the Dyscalculia Network now for quite a few years, and it's just never been anything. I mean, if anyone else has had an experience, that would be great, and please do come and correct. But in my experiences, I've never come across it.
Is there anyone on the call tonight who thinks they might go into work and trigger this, or go to Access and Work and trigger it after listening to this?
We'll wait and see if anyone types anything.
Yes.
or says anything. Do join in.
Yes. And
well, I am now able to do workplace needs assessments, and
you are
because I did Katrina's course, which was amazing. But I'm also a dyscalculia specialist, so that's hopefully that will prove useful.
I think it's a lot about confidence, isn't it? And I think a lot of people don't realise that they can self-diagnose. So go on the gov.uk website and have a look at the steps. It's not difficult to apply.
Anna asks, a lot of jobs want you to have your English and Maths at grade 4 or above. Is there any way around this if you haven't achieved that grade?
Well, I'm just thinking myself about when I have taught adults, that it's been easier to get a grade 3 than grade 2 or grade 3 than to get a GCSE. So the GCSEs are hard, aren't they, to get? I know myself, I had to take them 3 or 4 times before I got them. I think that, again, reasonable adjustment. I've heard that some universities are saying that if someone is dyscalculic, they don't need to meet that minimum grade. So I think it's looking at reasonable adjustments. It's looking at whether or not you can make the case that you may never get it. So I think it's changing, though. I know for teaching it's changed, hasn't it? You used to have that minimum maths qualification.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's a lot of information for one evening. Oh, hold on. So Lorraine says, I want to do a master's in public health, but there's, now I can't say that word, epidemiology. Ooh. Sorry, very, very big word. I'm not sure if that's how you say it, and apologies if that's wrong. And statistics mandatory module. Is it just extra time that is offer for support? Is there anything else?
Well, no, if you do a master's, you can get disabled students allowance. So you would need a full diagnostic assessment for that, but it would be worth it. You would get a lot of support. You would get some specialist tuition to help you with that. So Amanda here offers that, don't you? You work with students. So I think it would be worth looking at disabled students allowance actually for you. Well worth it.
She says she's got a diagnosis already, so
great.
Yeah, I think look into the DSA support then, Lorraine. Around what's available.
Definitely.
Oh, thank you so much, Katrina. There's so much information there. I think we're all going to go away thinking that all through. And thank you everyone for joining. I'm just going to turn off the recording. Thank you, Katrina.
Oh, pleasure. Do come back. Do email me with any questions. Very happy to help.